Okay, so I'm really excited about this. The logic to actually move the pieces is pretty simple. So we talked about potentially refactoring this so we're generating the board with JavaScript, which I might want to do first. I might want to do that first. Before we get too far. I think that'll just make everything cleaner. So let's do that. Let's try generating this board with JavaScript. So the idea is we'll have just one element that we're using as the template. So we'll have, let's do like file dot, and then grab these classes, okay? And we'll have just square dot deflex, and then we just grab the rest of this so I don't have to type it all out, okay? And what we're going to do, let me minimize all this, is we're going to have a nested, two nested for loops that just run 8 times each to do all of this. So maybe if you're watching this and you want to try and challenge yourself, try and write some JavaScript to create our board for us. So what I'm going to do is first of all see why that first one's not showing up. Oh, it is showing up. It just happens to be white. So now let's actually start writing some JavaScript. So let's add a function. Add file. Function. Add square. And we'll have a function like populate, create board. And maybe instead of add file, we want, well, yeah, that's fine. Let's see what this looks like, okay? So we'll do for, there we go, for let I equals 0, I is less than, so I just hit tab, not array.length. We're going to just do 8. And right now I'm just hard coding that 8. Save that. We'll also copy this and now do J. So first things first, we're looping through this first time. We're going to create our file. So I'm going to call add file, and I'm just going to pass in the index. And now add file. What we're going to call is, we're going to grab that file, clone it, and then append it to our board. Okay? Well, we want to clone it and call it what? So let me do const grid equals A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. Okay? And I'll show you why I'm doing this. Dot clone dot atr ID, and we're going to set that ID to file dash grid at the location I. And what this is going to do is it's going to say that this file is going to have an ID of file dash whatever this index of the grid is, which let's say that we're looping through this the first time. This I is 0. The 0th element of this grid, we can just look at it here. So const grid, maybe let's see if you can see that. Is this actually going to be helpful at all to use the magnifier? There might be a better way of doing that. Let me just zoom in this way. Const grid equals FGH. And now grid at the position 0 is A. Cool. So append that to the board. And we also want to call add square. Add square. And what do we want to pass in? We want to pass in I and J. So just to let's do file and row. Okay. And now when we're adding our square, what we're going to do is, before I forget actually, file.first.clone. That's what we want to do. And now for our squares, let's grab this square that we're just using as our template, and we'll do .square.first.clone. Give it a unique ID, which is the first one's going to be A1, right? Grid. There, and then it's also going to be row +1. Make sure this works. So save that and see what we got. Full screen this real quick, zoom out. Oh, we're not calling this function. So in here, let's call create board and see what we get. And see what we get. We get nothing. We get nothing. You lose. You lose, sir. So what did we do wrong? Move this back to the right and see what we got. What happens if I call this manually? And let's say that file at first is, let's say, var file equals 0, because that's what we expect it to be at first. Does this file? Come on. ID exist? I think it does. Oh, append to the ID board. And then here we need to do append to, and we want to append it to this newly created file, right? So let's select that, and it's going to be file dash oh shoot. Actually, yeah, file dash. That should work, right? Right? Okay, it's yelling at me. At least it's yelling at me. At least we're hopefully getting something useful. So what is this saying? Add square. It's yelling at me in add square. So let's see what we're doing. .attr. Oh, I need to do. We want to set the ID to be. In this case, it should be A1, right? That looks, I don't know about you. I don't know about you, but that looks to me like a chessboard. So ID file A, B, C, D, E, F, G. A1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay. What I do want to do, however, is I'm just calling 2 lowercase here because I want to see what this looks like with lowercase values. And I like that more. I could just change this to lowercase a through h, but this works. That's fine. It works. Okay. What I also want to do is grab these, take them out of the board, because these are just our templates. We're not using those templates. I'm going to add a class .d-none, and then let's just give an idea of ID equals templates. Put those in there. And that's great. Everything works. I'll get rid of this commented section in a second. Because now we've created our board dynamically with jQuery. The problem now is we have to add the pieces, right? So how do we want to do this? I think what we could do is have templates for each of our pieces. And then, so let me show you a thing. Let me show you what I'm thinking. I could show you the world. Sorry, I won't sing again. I won't do it. Unless I want to, then I'll do it. So let's, for example, grab our pawn. Let me grab all of these, actually. I don't need them. I was going to say, let me grab all of these. However, comment that out again. I don't, just get rid of this. I don't need that anymore. I don't need it. Get rid of all this. Get rid of all that markup. And let's do pawn. But get rid of the text white because we'll add that dynamically depending on what pieces or I guess, yeah, what color pieces we're adding. So how do we want to do this? Just to demonstrate this, or I guess I just want to get something on the canvas, right? Get something on the canvas. So let's make a function called add function, add pawns. Is white. And I'll show you why I'm doing this. If, well, let's do add another for loop. Just call this I. And then get rid of this. Let's just do 8. And then what we'll do is what I want to do is let's give this an ID of pawn. I might change it. We'll see. Give it an ID of pawn. So let's do pawn dot clone, or sorry, pawn dot first dot clone dot append dot attribute. Let's give this a unique ID. Let's give it a unique ID. What do we want to call this? Because it doesn't necessarily, we could just call it like A2 pawn, B2 pawn, C2 pawn. However, you'll notice in chess, I mean, that pawn isn't necessarily going to live on this file the entire game, right? But maybe it would be useful to just give it a unique name that's based on its starting position, so we know wherever it ends up, we still have some sort of trail of where it started. So let's do this attribute ID, and we're gonna what do we want it to be called? We want it to be called A2 pawn as the ID, or B2 pawn. Oops, right? So let's say that the ID is going to be grid I. So there's our A. And we know it's going to be on the second if is white, question mark. If it's white, then we know it's going to be 2. Otherwise, it's 7. A2 dash pawn dot append to the square A2. The square A2. A, and then either A2 or A7, depending on whether it's white, right? So hopefully this should give us the second part, this append to should give us an idea of A2, B2, A7, B7, depending on should call add pawns, depending on what side we're on. So add pawns, and we'll say true. And that worked. Let's see if our IDs are what we expect them to be. A2 pawn. B2 pawn. C2 pawn. Okay, good stuff. But we also want to say, let's do .add class here. And the class we want to add is, so you'll notice I'm using this tilde, or sorry, this backtick, and this $sign curly brace notation, and that is JavaScript string templates, JavaScript template strings, template literals. So read up on this and see what syntax I'm using. Just an easy way to add additional values to our string based on variables. So we want to add a class is white, question mark. Actually, I can do this. Wait. Is white, question mark. If it is, text white, otherwise text black. Oh my, what did I do? What did I do? Is white is not defined. Oh, I added it to the wrong place. I added it to the wrong place. Let's add it here. Whoops. So now let's give ourselves an easier view. And say, let's call add pawns, but say this is false. Now we add the black pawns. That's cool. That's cool. I'm just thinking, let's have another kind of container method for this. So we're creating the board, and let's say populate board, right? And now in populate board, populate board. What? No. Get out of here. I didn't do that. Populate board. And here's where we're going to call add pawns true and false. I was also thinking, does it make sense to actually, is there going to be a case where we only want to create the white pawns and only create the dark squared? I don't think so. I don't think so. But we know we're going to be at least looping through this same logic twice. I mean, there's other clever ways of doing this where we can say that this loop is actually, we're going through this like 16 times. But this works. I think it's fine. Yeah, I think that works. So we can have something very similar for the knights, for the bishops, for the rooks, for the queen, for the king. Does it make sense to break these up into separate functions? Probably. Are these functions going to have some similarities? Are they going to be very similar code-wise? Probably. Is that any reason not to still split them up? No. Let's just, I think it's fine still. We can refactor it later. So let's have a function. Let's add our rooks now. Function add rooks is white. And we want to do something similar where we've got a template. Rook. If our code ends up being super redundant, which it will, then we might be able to come up with a more clever way of looping through this. But let's just, like I said, get some paint on the canvas. Am I saying that this is a work of art? Not necessarily. But I'll pretend that it is. Or something. Okay. So let's copy that code. Rook. This is, I guess, where we'll differentiate because obviously there's only 2 rooks for each side. Can you end up having more rooks later in the game? Certainly. I don't know Actually, I don't know if there's ever been like a game where, well, I don't see why there would actually be any benefit to, when you're promoting a pawn, to turning it into a rook rather than a queen, because the queens can do everything the rooks can do and some. There are some use cases for turning it into a knight when you're promoting it rather than a queen, and those are really cool. Those kind of mates where checkmate with a knight promotion, those are cool. Any hoodle, grab that rook, clone it, and we want to give it an ID of a it's going to be A1 and A8, right? So we got to do something more clever here. This for loop might actually not, it might not make sense. It might not make sense. Ooh. Okay, I just thought of what we should be doing to recycle code. First, let's do this. And I'll show you what I'm thinking, though, in a sec. So what do we want to do with the rook? If it's white, at first it's going to be A1. Otherwise, A8. 1 or 8. Okay. If it's black, or sorry, grid 0 to give us the A, grid 0 to give us the A, A1 or 8. We also want to add one to H, which is our 7th element of the grid, H1 or 8. We're not calling it yet. Okay, so we've got our rooks now. However, you see we have a lot of recycled code between these add pawns and add rook method. The only thing is some of the values are changing. So we've got 3 different variables. We've got A through 8, and then we've got the actual we've got the square number for white and the square number for black. I think we can do this. We can do function add piece. And I think I also want to do const pieces equals pawn knight, I guess pawn rook knight bishop king queen. I think it makes more sense to do it this way, and I'll show you why. Oh, well. Oh, it's yelling at me for this. I was hoping that okay, so what of course knight isn't defined. I know it's not. So it's yelling at me because of how I'm creating this object. So I've really got to do pawn, rook, rook, knight, knight. Spell bishop right. Bishop, bishop, king, king, queen, queen. Oops. Okay. So really I'm using this as an enumerator. So what is this function going to take in? It's going to take in a piece. What are we trying to add? And where are we trying to add it? Doesn't make sense to. Let's try that. Let's just pass in the coordinate as one parameter, and then for example, we're looping through this 7 times, and what would this add piece function look like? Hopefully I'll show you what I'm trying to do here in a second, if it's not obvious what I'm doing yet. So we're going to call piece dot first dot clone dot attribute the attr ID and set that to our coordinate. Or set that to coordinate dash piece. Okay. Let's pass in the Boolean here. Well, actually, let's take in a CSS class. Add class. Add class. CSS class. Append to our coordinate. Right? And now let's call that, instead of for add pawns, let's call this new function add piece. And we know, for example, we're going to be calling add piece. 8 times for white, 8 times for black. Add piece, what are we adding? Pieces dot pawn. What's the coordinate? We can copy this. That should give me a it's actually going to be, it's always going to be 2. And then, since this is, we're just calling this for white, we want to add text white. See. Oh, interesting. That would be a very interesting game of chess. You got 2 pawns in each square. There's lots of chess variants, but I've never seen a variant where you can have 2 pieces occupying the same square at the same time. So why is it doubling up? Because I commented this code out. I don't get it. 32. What? Oh, it's because I'm calling add pawns twice. That's why. Yeah, this feels better. But I also want to do it for A7, black. There's a much better way of doing it. Okay, that's what I wanted to do. That's much cleaner. That's much, much cleaner. Okay. So now, what are we going to do? Our add rooks function. Well, first of all, we're not going to call it twice. Second of all, we're not using the Boolean here in the add pawns. Add rooks, what we want to do is add pieces, and it's pieces.rook. And the rook is going to go in A1. Yeah. A1, A8. 0, 0, and 8. Oh my god. Oh, wait. Oh, that's, I added up there. Oops. So actually we want it to be A1 and H1 for white. Add white rooks. Let me just make it a comment. Thank you. And add black rooks. And now this is going to be 8, 8, black. Much, much cleaner. Much cleaner. And here's what's nice about this. Here's what's nice about this is when we actually add our logic to move the pieces, we'll just call the same function. What we'll effectively do is when we're moving a piece, let me refresh. When we're moving a piece, we click here and then here. Once we go through all the magic of validating that we're making sure it's a valid move, we'll just delete the piece here and re-add it here, for example. Which I paused there for a second because I want to think if that's actually the best way of doing it, or if we can just straight up use jQuery like we saw and just select this element and move it. That might actually be better than deleting and re-adding it. So we might have a variant of this that's move piece. Yeah, let's do that. So you notice how much cleaner this is now. You notice how much cleaner this is. We don't have a whole lot. This is our entire chess game. I mean, obviously I have to add the rest of the pieces, but that's not a whole lot of lines of code. 34 lines makes up the entire HTML, and then 50 lines of code is the entire JavaScript for all of this? You kidding me? That's awesome. What time are we at? We're at 38. Okay, so let's quickly add functions to add the rest of the pieces. So we've got add rooks. Let's add our knights. And what I'm doing is I'm really just going, I guess, clockwise from the pawns. So pawn, rook, knight, bishop, king, queen. I don't know. That's my logic for adding the functions in this order. So let's call this add knights. Pieces.knight. And the knights are going to go 2 and 7. A2 and A7. Shit. Oh, well. Nope, that's not right. That's not right. That's why I confused myself. 1, 6, So that should be B, right? B1 and G1. There's got to be a better way of visualizing this grid, right? Like, it's kind of confusing. 0, 1, 2, 3, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. No, that's the 6th. But let's just see. Okay, now let's call this add night method in populate board. And we're no longer using this Boolean. What? Shit. Oh, we don't have a template for the night. That'll do it. That will do it. We have nothing to copy. We had nothing to copy. Right? So now we got our nights. So while we're here, I guess let's get all this done at once. Knight, bishop, king, queen. Bishop, king, queen, ID, bishop, king, queen. Add knights, add bishops, get rid of this Boolean. And it's 2 and 5, 2 and 5. Pieces of bishop. Call that function. Make sure this one works first before we move on. Add bishop. Oh, add bishops. And now add kings. And best for last, right? Queens. So of course, add king, add white king, add black king. And now this is going to be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 and 4. King. King. One more time. One more time. Add queen. Queens. 0, 1, 2, 3. 3. And now let's call that function. Well, I guess first of all, let's call the kettle black. Rename those variables. Kings, add queens. And we got an entire chessboard created dynamically in 90 lines of JavaScript. So in only slightly more lines, well, not slightly, in 30% more lines than there are squares on the board. That's pretty good. So in the next one, let's work on adding logic to move pieces.